Yeah, friends. Today we will be taking up the second module's three subtopics: evaluation of research problem, criteria and sources for identifying problem, process of defining the problem. Evaluation of a research problem. See, as we discussed earlier, we have already seen how are we to identify a problem. How are we to define a research problem in the first place, and then identify a research problem. As discussed earlier, not all problems are research problems. There are problems that are generic in nature. There are problems that are explorative in nature. For instance, anything related to astrology, astronomy, space, cosmology, and anything of such kind is very explorative. There is no definite answers to it. Or even in the planet, if we have to find the count of molecules, let's say, or the count of cells in various species, you may know the number of species. Let's say you say about 150 million species, that you might give a count, but you can't measure the cells, how many are there. And even the best of our computers cannot compute such a data. So these are problems that cannot be measured, and therefore it doesn't fall under the purview of research problem. Research problem is one which can be measured, which can be where the data could be collected, where it can be visualized, where it can help us understand and decipher the patterns of how data tends to emulate itself. So evaluation of a research problem becomes pertinent, becomes very important, because unless you evaluate the problem, whether it is within your means to conduct the problem or the study, you cannot do a study. Let's assume I do ask you, I ask you to do a research on two things. First topic is to find out the interest levels of your friends in having coffee at the cafe coffee day or Starbucks or anywhere else. The second research that I am asking you to do is to go find out how much of savings that this particular street in, let's say, Malleshwaram has got. This particular street, the people in Malleshwaram, that street, you will have to go check with them what is their savings level, how much of savings. Now, which do you think the data will be easier for you to obtain? Certainly the data where you are going to ask your friends, and definitely not the data which is going to be confidential, where the people are not going to reveal about the savings that they are having. Importantly, even your own parents will not reveal to you what savings they are having in their banks and what are the movable and immovable properties, unless they are very transparent to their children. So there is a lot of challenges in the definition of problem, identification of problem, and now what we are talking of is evaluating whether you could conduct a research at all in the first place, whether data could be obtained, whether the data that is so obtained is reliable, etc. So that is the reason we do this evaluation of a research problem. So the evaluation of a research problem is got to do with the significance of the study. How important do you think that study is? Today you are going to do a research on, let us say, unemployability after COVID-19. Once the lockdown is over and the business resumes normal, maybe by the month of August or September, you might want to do a survey which is going to give us a data about the unemployability levels. How many people pre-COVID were employed and post-COVID were asked to go? I just saw one article in the newspaper yesterday which spoke about the gig economy companies, that is the startup companies like Ola, Uber, Swiggy, Zomato, and so many other companies. And the right column is how many employees have been given the pink slip, which means we have been asked to go home. which means they have been terminated from their services. So there is a lot of unemployment that has happened, and it is going to continue in the next June, July, August. So we will have to now find out by September what kind of levels of unemployment, what difference of unemployment level. So this becomes very significant for the youngsters to understand how good are their chances for a placement after their studies. So yes, this type of a study is very significant and we can conduct it. Right? So this is about the significance of the study. Next comes the researchability of the study. Researchability is, can you, as discussed, can you find the data? Can you collect the data? Can you find the right people? Is the data that is so collected reliable, etc.? That is called researchability. Third comes feasibility. How much money, time the researcher has to spend, and should the researcher be traveling to places? Should the researcher work in remote locations in order to collect the data? So how that is going to affect the researcher's work-life balance, and how competent and sincere is the researcher in order to get a accurate, reliable, valid, concrete data? So these are all some of the challenges that confront a researcher. So this is what we call evaluation of a research problem. The next topic will be the criteria and sources of identifying problem. Now this, how do you identify a problem? We have already discussed. Again, I am just going to touch upon the basics. First is significance to a discipline. As you are all a management student, you might take any multidisciplinary subject, let us say for instance technology, but essentially you will have to connect it with management. You cannot purely take up a science. Let's say you are a BSc Home Science graduate and now you have chosen to do MBA. But you would not want to do your project on BSc Home Science entirely. It is not acceptable because you are studying an MBA, you are studying a management course, and therefore we expect you to do a research and a project on management related items. But you are open, or you are welcome to connect your previous acquired skills in the home science. So this is what significance to your discipline means. Then there must be originality for research, which means the idea of why you are doing it and how it is going to be contributive, translational, must be first defined and drafted clearly. The third comes feasibility of the study. Feasibility means, as we discussed, how much of money, time, competence, resources, interest, researchers' interest, etc. These all comes under the feasibility. And finally, the administrative support. If you are having a research that is funded by the government, funded by any other agency, funded by a corporate, let's say you work as a consultant for the team lease which wants to find the unemployment levels, then perhaps the company team lease would be funding you, and they might be paying you your salary as well. And not just that, for all the spendings that you do in order to collect data, in order to use the statistical tools, in order to publish reports, bind the books, and whatever, all the costs that you incur as a part of the research would be refunded to you. That is called administrative support. So these are all the criteria and sources while you are trying to identify a problem for research. Next is the process of defining research problem. We would discuss this a bit later, but I am going to quickly touch base on what are the different steps in the process of defining a research problem. First one, as we discussed earlier, is we identify the very problem itself, and within quotes whether it is researchable, and I have discussed it already. Next comes review of literature. One must understand while conducting research that we are not the first person in this world to conduct a research on any topic under the roof, because all the topics that we see, it means it is a borrowed knowledge. See, you can only do a topic which you are aware of. Let us say I ask you to do a topic on something related to Hispanics in the Central America. You may not have read anything. You don't know a bit of what Hispanics, the Central America, what is their migration history, etc. So it is not fair for us to ask you to do any research on it because you do not know. But let's assume I give you some 5 books on the Hispanics, how they migrated from the Europe to the United States, and then to push to the Central America, that's the South America, Peru, Chile, Argentina, Brazil, Venezuela, etc. and how they settle. And if I were to give you these books, then that forms the literature review, which means now you have an idea and you are now good and fit to do a research. This is called review of literature. So anything that you touch, you will want to read what is the background and then move ahead. Third is the clarify the problem, clarification. The problem must be clear. It cannot have ambiguities. It must not be confusing. It should not be confounding. It should not be in a way that the researcher himself or herself is unable to clearly define the problem to anyone else who is listening to it. Next is clearly define terms and concepts. Whatever additional words that you are using, you must be able to define it. Then you define the population. What is the, for instance, how many people use a shoe of the size, let us say 3. It means instantly you are looking at a population of between 3 years old to about 7 to 8 years old children. So the size of 3 is limiting a population. So in India, you can find out how many children are there between the age of 1 to 10, and within that you can find out how many of them are within the age of 3 to 8, and that becomes your population. From that, let us say you have about 1 crore of children. You take about 5,000 of kids and try to do a research. That is called sample. Okay. So then you develop an instrument and a tool for data collection, after which you collect data and lastly you analyze the data. So this is a brief process again in the form of a flow chart, which I have copied from the research methodology resource book that I shared with you, C.R. Kothari. Right? So this is the topic. So the 3 subtopics we have covered. So I will just show you. We have covered the evaluation of problem. We have covered the criteria and sources for identifying problem and the process of defining the problem. So with that, we will stop for today and we will continue in the next session.